welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going on a pretty strange journey, actually. We're looking at two subjects that seem like they have absolutely nothing in common. On one hand, you have the insane micro-precision needed for competitive gaming. You know, that perfect flick shot. And on the other, the macro psychology of the world's biggest high achievers. This idea of controlled delusion.
They really do feel worlds apart. One is just pure physics, engineering millimeters of friction on a mouse pad. The other is, well, it's about bending your own reality. But our mission today is to find the one principle that ties them both together. And that's the absolute need for accurate calibration, for reliable feedback. Because in either case, whether you're learning a skill or trying to do the impossible, it all falls apart if you can't trust the data you're getting back.
And the sources we have for this are just fantastic. We've got these super technical spec sheets for high-end gaming mouse pads, Zoe, East Tiger. We're talking polyurethane foam density and humidity resistance. Right next to that, we have these dense theoretical papers on adaptive grandiosity and Steve Jobs' reality distortion field. So this is a deep dive into the engineering of both the hardware and the wetware of what it takes to succeed.
Let's start small, like micro-scale small. With the gaming mouse, I think for people who aren't deep in esports, it's easy to forget what a modern mouse sensor is. We hear about DPI, polling rates, but at its core, it's basically a tiny, super high-speed camera, a CMOS sensor. It's taking thousands of pictures of the surface right underneath it, lit up by an LED, and it compares those pictures to track movement.
Right, and that's the key. That's where the surface becomes everything. Because if that tiny camera is looking at a surface that's inconsistent, birdie, just variable, then even the most expensive sensor, like a Pixar 3D95, is just working with corrupted data.
It's like trying to navigate with a map where the scale keeps changing. Exactly. It's useless. And that's why these specialized surfaces exist. They're designed to eliminate every single one of those variables.
Okay, so the sources broke these down into what, three main categories?
Correct. First, you've got your safest, most popular choice, the cloth pads. They're a woven fabric top, usually on a foamed rubber base. They give you this medium friction, they're comfortable, and they offer really predictable control.
So this is for the players who make those big sweeping arm movements.
Precisely. Low to medium sensitivity players. In tactical shooters like Valorant or CSGO Go, you see pros all over pads like the Artisan Zero or the ZOE G640. They give you maximum stopping power.
But the trade-off is speed.
The trade-off is always speed. So if you need more speed, but you don't want to give up all your control, you move to the hybrid pads. These are kind of the best of both worlds attempt. It's usually a cloth weave that's been infused with a synthetic fiber or given a special coating.
So it's a faster glide.
A much faster glide, but you still have a little bit of that stopping power, that hint of friction that cloth gives you.
And then you have the extreme end of the spectrum, the speed demons, the hardened glass pads.
Oh yeah. These are for players with just rock-solid mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking pads like the Sky Pad, which is literally a sheet of glass. They have almost zero resistance. The lightest touch sends the mouse gliding.
The performance ceiling on that must be huge.
It is, but the skill floor is just as high. Every tiny shake, every little jitter in your hand, it shows up instantly on screen. It demands an almost inhuman level of control.
It's incredible. Let's dig into the details on the control pads, the ones the pros use. We have the specs for the Zoe GTR and the East Tiger Wuji. Both are cloth, but they're approaching control from different angles. ZOA is all about stability, right?
All about stability and stopping power. They engineered the GTR to maximize something they call dynamic friction.
Which is just a fancy term for it.
Stopping on a dime. And the key is its base. It's a softer, but very high density rubber.
And the density is important because it doesn't squish down when you press on it.
Exactly. Think about a pro gamer making a super fast flick shot. They often slam their hand down to stop the mouse. If that pad compresses, the friction changes instantly and your control is gone.
You've lost your calibration point.
You've lost it. Their goal is effortless stopping. The surface does the work, not the base. And they even treat the cloth to resist humidity.
Because sweat can make it feel sticky. Another variable.
Another variable to eliminate. It's all about making sure the feedback is 100% reliable.
Okay, so now compare that to the East Tiger Wuji. They're also after control, but they're focused on the weave itself.
That's right. The Wuji is a fine surface control pad, but their innovation is in the knit. They use something called unfelted thread knitting. And this is engineered for what they call high XY axis consistency.
Okay, what does that mean in plain English?
It just means that moving the mouse up and down feels exactly the same as moving it left and right.
Ah, so on cheaper pads, the weave can have a grain to it.
It can have a grain, a directional bias. So your horizontal sensitivity might feel slightly different from your vertical. The Wu-G is designed to eliminate that hidden variable completely.
That's a tiny detail that makes a massive difference.
It's everything, and their base is different too. It's a polyurethane foam, denser and softer than rubber, with a faster rebound. But again, the goal is identical. Absolute, repeatable, trustworthy feedback.
Okay, so we've established that mastery at the micro level with a mouse pad. It all comes down to perfect, consistent, reliable feedback. So how on earth does that connect to something like Steve Jobs' reality distortion field? What's the parallel?
The parallel is that both are systems designed to manage reality. One manages physical reality, the other manages your internal cognitive reality. The psychological concept here is called adaptive grandiosity, or maybe a better term is functional overconfidence.
Functional overconfidence. So this isn't just ego.
No, it's not a pathology, it's a tool. It's a deliberate cognitive strategy where you allow your belief in your own ability to exceed the objective probability of success.
So you're basically saying it's a useful way to lie to yourself.
Strategically, yes. Look, behavioral economics shows us that if the chance of success is really low, say 10%, a purely rational person often just gives up. They experience decision paralysis. Adaptive grandiosity is like a cognitive override. It stops you from stalling out when things look grim.
And Steve Jobs was the absolute master of this. His reality distortion field, the RDF. What was the actual mechanic he was using?
The source material calls it temporal probability redistribution.
That's a mouthful.
It is, but the idea is actually pretty straightforward. Jobs wasn't just denying reality. He was taking a distant, maybe possible future, and he was collapsing it into the present. He made it feel inevitable. Now, he convinced himself, and then his team, that impossible tasks were not just possible, but they were achievable through sheer force of will.
He was pulling the deadline from 5 years away to today.
And that conviction is what creates the momentum to actually do the impossible thing.
That idea, that the key is knowing how to lie to yourself effectively, that's so counterintuitive, especially when we're so obsessed with the truth.
I know. The examples are powerful. Look at the world chess champion, Magnus Carlsen. He's on record saying his mindset is somewhere between optimist and delusional optimist.
Why?
Because he argues that pure rationality in chess today makes you too risk-averse. His slightly delusional confidence lets him try aggressive new ideas and grind out endgames that a computer would just call a draw. He takes risks a rational mind wouldn't.
And that's only possible if you believe you have a better chance of winning than the data says you do.
Or look at Joan of Arc. She had zero military experience. But her absolute conviction, this narrative of a divine mandate, it gave her such unshakable strategic focus that it broke the decision paralysis of her veteran commanders. That conviction became a catalyst that helped turn the tide at the siege of Orleans, an outcome that defied all rational military analysis at the time.
And it seemed like the engine that powers all of this is what the sources call intrinsic motivation, doing it for the love of the game.
Yes, that's Richard Feynman's big insight. He said his Nobel Prize-winning work on quantum electrodynamics didn't come from trying to solve some big, important problem. It came from, in his words, piddling around with a wobbling plate in a cafeteria.
He was just having fun.
He was having fun. Yeah. By reframing the work as play, he bypassed all the anxiety and pressure of doing important work. The fun itself becomes the engine that powers the whole grand assumption that just messing around is going to lead to something huge.
Okay, but this has to be a fine line. What's the actual difference between a visionary using this tool and someone who is just pathologically delusional?
It all comes down to one thing, the feedback loop, what the sources call feedback integration. A pathological delusion, the kind that ends in failure, like, say, Theranos, is defined by belief rigidity. It practices reality suppression.
It ignores any data that contradicts the belief.
Actively ignores it. It protects the belief at all costs, even when the experiments are failing.
But the visionary is different.
Completely different. The visionary practices what's called visionary accuracy. They generate concrete, testable actions from their grand vision, that's action coherence, and then they obsessively study the results. They adjust their tactics based on that feedback while still holding on to the strategic conviction.
So Jobs' RDF worked because he wasn't just saying, make it happen. He was recruiting specific engineers, setting impossible deadlines, and then seeing what broke.
And then fixing what broke. He adjusted based on the feedback from reality.
Right, like Zaha Hadid's architectural designs. They were first called unbuildable. But her vision created a friction with engineering that forced engineering to evolve and catch up.
That's a perfect example. Her vision was non-negotiable. But she still had to work with engineers who were bound by the brutal physics of the real world. Or think about Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh in Egypt. She didn't argue for women's rights. She performed the most incredible act of adaptive grandiosity. She just declared herself male, wore the false beard, and ruled as a man.
She rejected the established reality of her time.
Completely. And then she retroactively proved her vision right by being an incredibly effective ruler.
So the secret is learning how to live in two realities at once. The impossible one you're creating through conviction.
And the present one that's giving you brutally honest feedback on every single step you take. That feedback is the perfect, consistent friction on the mousepad.
Which brings us to the inverse problem. If visionaries need that brutal, honest feedback to succeed, what happens when that feedback loop gets corrupted? Not by malice, but by niceness.
You're talking about pro-social deception, the benevolent lie, giving someone inflated praise just to make them feel.
Exactly, and the sources have named this the tyranny of niceness.
Right, Evelyn Summers. And it's linked to a personality trait called unmitigated communion. That's the overwhelming drive to prioritize someone else's emotional comfort over the truth. We see it as a virtue, but for skill development, it's actually disastrous.
How does it actively hurt people's ability to get better?
It causes a feedback loop disruption. On a neurological level, when you're learning a skill, any skill, your brain relies on getting a clear error signal when you mess up.
It needs to know that wasn't right.
It needs to know. If you tell a kid, good job on a sloppy math problem, their brain doesn't get the signal it needs to correct the mistake. False positive feedback literally denies the brain the data it needs for neurocognitive calibration. It short-circuits the learning process. You're effectively freezing their skill level right where it is.
And that has to create some kind of psychological damage, right? That gap between what people are telling you and what you know to be true about yourself.
It absolutely does. It's called the imposter syndrome paradox. If you're constantly getting praise that you know you haven't earned, you don't feel good, you feel a chronic anxiety that you're going to be found out. The lie creates a constant state of stress.
And we saw this play out on a huge scale, didn't we?
We did. The self-esteem movement in America from the 70s through the early 2000s was basically a giant social experiment in this. The whole philosophy was to protect kids from failure, use constant praise, inflate grades.
And what happened?
Well, the data shows that self-esteem went up, but actual competence went down. And at the same time, narcissistic traits, depression, and anxiety all increased.
A huge price to pay for short-term comfort.
A massive price. The conclusion from the research is pretty clear. Genuine care isn't about making people feel comfortable. It's about creating an environment where accurate feedback can be delivered with compassion, but without being diluted. #outro.
And that brings it all back home. Back to the mousepad. The Ziri GTR, the ESP Tiger Wu G. These aren't just accessories. They are highly engineered tools built for one purpose: to give you perfectly accurate, consistent, truthful feedback. And high performance, whether it's in gaming or in business, depends on that exact same commitment to the truth of your own performance.
Right. Whether you're managing the physical friction between a mouse and a pad, or the cognitive friction between your vision and reality, the lesson is the same. The brutal truth of your performance is what sets you free to actually improve. The visionary wins because they hold on to the big idea, but they also embrace the ruthless, tedious details of the calibration process.
So whether you're trying to land a shot in an esports final or launch a company on a timeline everyone else calls delusional, success demands that you accept the truth of where you are right now, even if you first have to convince yourself of the possibility of where you're going.
And here's a final thought to chew on. We know from computational models of decision-making that being about 15 to 25% overconfident seems to be the sweet spot for discovering new goals and succeeding. It appears to be computationally optimal. So maybe the hardest part of achieving great things isn't figuring out what you want to do. Maybe the real skill is calibrating exactly how much to distort reality in your favor, and knowing the precise moment to let that brutal, undeniable truth come flooding back in.